Folks, it is time for another discussion in the physical video game landscape and talk about where we are right now, which it's not looking too good nowadays if we're being honest, but you all know I'm a big advocate of this space, and it is a space that is still there. We can always acknowledge that it's seen year-over-year declines for physical video games relative to where they once were, but the low is still a large portion of buyers that are looking to enjoy, buy, and play physical video games. And so there is something still there that can be accommodated to, but that's the issue, is that it lives and dies at the hands of the platform holders, the big three. We do not have third-party manufacturers of Sony, Microsoft, or rather PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo, right? So we need them to keep offering this if we want to have this be an option going into the next cycle of consoles. But we are just going down this path where it's not really getting better, it's just simply getting worse, which is that really all too shocking. But what we can get into for the separate stories here regarding all three, we've got Microsoft, which to obviously acknowledge they're the bottom of the totem pole in this category because they've conditioned their customers historically for a few years now to primarily buy, play, and engage with their games in a very digital way. And that's because of Game Pass, and that's also why we see these crazy retail ratio splits where when it comes to a very big third-party game, the majority of sales are on PlayStation. And again, at retail, mind you, so it would be 80-90% sometimes where PS5 discs are being sold versus the Xbox Series X version. So, and look, that's all well and good if that's their MO, and I say that not really agreeing with that. I would love for them to embrace physical media, but the core issue is they've now had a bit of a U-turn with their own business model, and they're now shipping software on what were previously seen as competitors, and that comes with a different set of customers in that they are looking to buy physical games more often than your run-of-the-mill Xbox customer. So we've seen the initial Xbox Game Studio titles that came over actually needed a facilitator, in that being LRG, to make sure they can fulfill and print some of those games and get them in the hands of customers. The issue now becomes when they are doing more games, and it's also highly dependent on a game-by-game basis. That's the other sort of overarching backdrop to the conversation, is it doesn't matter if it's the same publisher or not. It's highly dependent on a game-by-game basis, publisher-by-publisher basis, where sometimes they will do it themselves, sometimes they'll find a mediator like LRG or IM8-bit. So in that case, you've got Forza Horizon 5 not happening. However, you have Indiana Jones, where it is getting a PS5 disc print. But this too, they're dropping the ball on because it does not have the full game data on the disc. It's only like 20-something gigabytes, so it's confirmed to be a bit of a stub, and that you do have to pull the rest of the download from PlayStation Network. And that is problematic, obviously, because we want to advocate for these games that are completely installable and playable offline. You want a nice, solid gold master on the disc, and that is what physical media really is about at the end of the day. We don't want to, fall into this sort of what's been a misnomer for a long time, and that, oh, your physical games are actually just license keys and you don't actually own the disc. That's obviously not true, and it hasn't been true for a very long time. There's always been that, misinformation where we've kind of come full circle, right? But back in the PS4 days, where you copy a game from the disc and then you use the disc as a license, sure, it's acting as a license at that point, but you just copied the whole game data from the disc, right? We want the game fully playable and installable offline, and that's why the vast majority of PS4, 5, Xbox One, Series S, X, Nintendo Switch games, they can all be installed and played offline. Though we are seeing that start to, creep up a little bit for these stub games, basically, or these games that don't have a full gold master on the disc. And so in the case of Indiana Jones, they're not doing that game. But we know some publishers will really go out of their way to make sure, barring any sort of patches that may or may not be necessary. Again, all this stuff is usually cataloged on doesitplay.org. But, something like Rebirth will have a data disc and a play disc to make sure, going over that 100 gigs, which some games do obviously, they went that extra mile and made sure they've got something fully playable offline that will be fully playable offline on PlayStation hardware for years to come, decades even. It can go that long, absolutely. The point is, that's kind of where Microsoft is right now. With Sony, again, they're committed But how committed are they? Because we do have some examples going on nowadays, which, Sony is not printing Days Gone Remastered on PS5, and maybe their, sort of methodology there is that they have a PS4 disc out there, so there is already a playable offline build of that game, just in that it's a PS4 version. There's also a separate disc print for PS4 that has more recent patches, but a PS5 build as of right now is not playable offline via disc. That will not be an option. Maybe it will be down the road. Also, they did not do that for any of their PSVR 2 games that they shipped and published, like your Firewall Ultra or your Horizon Call of the Mountain. So we can see they are willing to make concessions in the interest of whatever their own choices are there, obviously, because they do have a sort of due diligence and commitment to customers. When you do have a circumstance of, Astrobot being half physical, you don't want to miss out on those sales. So Sony, I still expect, will be printing discs for quite a long time. Really, the bad news is we're seeing all those digital edition consoles go up in price, which you would think that's good news. I don't necessarily want to see any consoles go up in price, but those disk drives are going down in price to sort of offset that, which is great to see. We do know that right now the sales ratio for digital edition and physical PS5s is about 50-50. At launch, it was about 80-20. They were primarily selling disc consoles, but nowadays it's 50-50, and Sony does seem to have a reluctance to increase the price of that disc console, which is also good, but who knows how long that's really going to happen, because they have done it in certain regions in certain circumstances. The other big thing is Nintendo here, obviously, because the whole big news story with them and the Switch 2 reveal is a number of little micro controversies, but one of them is also Nintendo Switch 2 game cards, game key cards, I should say. There's been a lot of misinformation surrounding these. I don't know what's hard to follow on this, because they're very similar to what will happen in most other cases on the platforms we have now, which is you've got this physical game that will pull a download from the network, and that's your way to play the game. It's really not that different outside of Nintendo now giving this a more formal name, and there's now art on the box to at least, telegraph this information to the customer and let them know, hey, you're buying a game that does need a download. So there is that transparency, which is good, but what we don't like is the sort of backdrop behind the scenes of what is going into game key cards in general, and this is a rumor, mind you, but it makes sense. It comes from Physical Paradise over on YouTube, where they're claiming they've heard Nintendo just is not offering that many game card sizes. As in, there's a small size, a big size, and that big size is like 64 gigs, and the only other option is game key cards. That's maybe what explains this very odd situation of these smaller games that we know do not have a very large file footprint, but for some reason you've got Bravely Default, Survival Kids, Street Fighter 6, and they're going for the game key card route. And it's like, why would they not just print that full game on the game card for Switch 2 so it's fully playable offline? It's a rumor, but it makes sense in that maybe as far as vending options go, Nintendo is not offering a middle ground, so now you've got a very bad circumstance where there's no path here. Nintendo is just not offering enough options, and publishers are usually going to pick one option that is much more financially advantageous. The game key card, I would assume, doesn't even have much space on it at all. It really is the cheapest option in that it is simply there to facilitate an online handshake, and then you pull the download, and then that's how you can have a physical option for that game. That sucks. I hate that. But here's where it also gets so complicated, right? As much as I don't like that, and as much as I always will push against these games that require online installs, there's still the pro here in that they can be bought and sold, and that is confirmed. Game key cards are much like any other physical game that might require online, like Halo Infinite on Xbox Series X or Gran Turismo 7 on PlayStation 5. They have online requirements, sure, you can still buy and sell them, and that is the portion that I always advocate for, which is consumer power. These are games that, sure, there's online that's required, but they're still sold at retail, so you have multiple retailer options. You can price match, you can wait for sales. You have different retailer options versus the one storefront on PlayStation Network, the eShop, and the Xbox Network, where you have to wait for the publisher to decide when you get a sale. And you also have the chance of selling that game, lending it to a friend. I mean, it's so funny how we've come full circle on this this topic, right? Because it's been like the meme, the GameStop meme of you take your games into GameStop and they spit in your face, call you a whore, and give you $2 for 60 goddamn video games. But you know what's so ironic about that? They gave you something for it. You don't get anything when you pay full price on PSN, and it's just a digital license, and who knows how long you'll reasonably have access to that license versus the physical option of being able to do something with it. Maybe you don't have a mom and pop retro game store that can actually work with you on like fair market value for those games where they might buy it at like 50, upwards of 60, 70% for some of your more valuable games. So that might not be an option, but you know, as ironic as it sounds, GameStop will give you something for it, and that's always better than not having the option to do anything with it at all. You know what I mean? So that's sort of where I always sit on that conversation. So as much as I don't like the game key card thing and what it means or how it's going to incentivize a lot of publishers to maybe pick the lowest cost option to get their game at retail, you can still buy and sell them. So I mean, there's that. I don't like it, but you know, there is that thing to always consider about it. So it is weird though. I mean, we don't have that many game key cards announced just yet, but if that is like, if the rumor is true and that, let's say for Nintendo, they're not offering that many game card sizes for their publishing partners, and there really is like no middle card, or at least maybe the pricing is just really wacky to where they have to choose the game key card option, or it's just so low. Again, if it's that low of an option, you're going to see a lot of studios probably choose that to get their game available at retail. And that's going to encourage a certain behavior that I don't like. And it's not one that I even considered that maybe that's a path PlayStation would go down for, say, PlayStation 6. You know, who's to say they wouldn't offer, because I still believe PS6 will play discs and will probably have PS6 games printed on disc as well. But who's to say that wouldn't be something that they offer to their own publishing partners, and that, hey, you don't have to print your game on an Ultra HD Blu-ray. Here's just a Blu-ray. Here's a single layer Blu-ray. You know, like, who's to say that won't happen? And then the vast majority of games coming out, because most publishers will choose to ship their game on that, they're going to start making all these games require online to install them. So that's what sucks, is that in the here and now, and this has always been true, the vast majority of games can be installed and played offline. Because usually with like even the game key cards, for example, once you launch the game online one time, then it can be played offline. So it is a bit of a sticking point, but there is that caveat to clarify. So it's not looking good. I will say the decent news here is that Nintendo did confirm that their cross-gen Switch 2 edition games come with the Switch 1 and 2 version on the game card themselves. So you've basically got like a smart delivery game that has enough space on the card to print both versions on there. So that's great. I mean, there are examples every so often where it plays out exactly how you hope it would. You get a FF7 Rebirth with 2 discs and it installs and plays offline, and there's a lot of value there. And then you get something like Game Key cards or Activision shipping a stub on their discs, and you have to pull it from PSN. So it's holistically, we're still not in a great spot. That's sort of where we are right now with physical video games. Still not great, but we'll always have these talks when we have some of these bigger stories that pop up, especially between all 3 platform holders. But anyway, thank you for joining me in this conversation, and I'll see you all in my next video. You take it easy.